that I actually very much disagree with. And his statement is that one of the problems with cancel culture is that people have at least in his opinion, people have a false notion that comedians change the world, and therefore we need to like curate what they say because it's so powerful. And he says that that's wrong, that comedians aren't actually that powerful. I actually disagree. I actually think that comedians are better philosophers than philosophers. And now granted, so let me say, like, let's go back to, so for example, I believe, and I don't have any empirical evidence to back this up, but I believe that the thing that made the most progress for gay rights in the late 90s and early 2000s was Will and Grace. And the thing that best helped race relations in the 70s and even in the 2000s was Richard Pryor and Dave Chappelle. Now, the problem with this, and I hope this is answering your question, is that we've now found ourselves in kind of this ideological situation where people are very aware of this. Now, granted, they're aware of this power, you know, the power that cinema or like this monoculture can have in shaping society. Problem one is that doesn't exist anymore. You know, there are no monolithic kind of Game of Thrones. There's no Richard Pryor. There's no one that everybody listens to. So that's one problem in creating these hegemonic ideas. The second problem is that even if you try to force an ideology into a piece of film, I don't think it's going to work. I think like people are actually quite keen on being able to tell when an idea is, you know, there's a difference between it's true, therefore it's funny, which is, I think, how a lot of the left and cancel culture is operating, versus it's funny because it's true, which is how I think people like Will and Grace and Richard Pryor functioned. And I think that's how it creates these hegemonic ideas. But I think that right now, what I call like the kind of manufactured attempt to kind of become a social engineer / artist is misguided and isn't going to work.
So, Matheus, do you have any comment, or do you want me to?
Yeah, well, I mean, we would have to ask, like, what is philosophy for, or what is philosophy, in order to agree with this comment that you made. Because on one side, I've read about popular articles that say like the new philosophers are the comedians, and I agree to a certain extent, but we would have to do some philosophy of philosophy to talk about that. Like what is the goal of the philosopher? And there are many answers, right? It's a whole field. Like if we take philosophy as the classic definition for Plato, like the systematic approach to questions concerning ethics, epistemology, metaphysics, you know, logic and aesthetics, then the answer would be no, right? Because the role of the comedian is much more of society, right? The sociology, not the philosophy, right? And that would be the difference there. I think the word philosophy, and we all know this, it has been used so widely and for such a long time, and really although Marx said that he thought, and this is an expression more than an argument, right? Like his expression is that philosophers up until now have only interpreted the world, and the idea would be to change it, right? But that's one person, right? Although he was a very good philosopher, I don't know if he can speak for the whole of the discipline and at the whole of the time, right? In many ways, I think the problem with philosophy today, and not philosophy, because academic philosophy is one thing, right? On the philosophical departments and everything, it's moving forward. But when it connects to the internet, the concept of philosophy connected to the concept of the internet, it really explodes. I agree with what you said on human rights. Perhaps comedy has made much more on human rights than philosophy. And I get this a lot from some of my students when I teach ethics, especially meta-ethics and normative ethics in Mexico. Imagine teaching this high theory, and then people go into the world and they see that the world is not like the theory, right? But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't stop doing theory. We need to understand, because if we want to change the world, we ought to understand it first. How can we change something we don't understand? So that's where I think the role of the philosopher is. And understanding it at a philosophical level, that would be for philosophers. Understanding it on a sociological level and even psychological, I think comedians are really killing it there. And I don't think they should be,
even compared,
limited in that sense. Well, Louis C.K., he made an argument. He made pre-Socratic philosophy live. He was doing an argument from Parmenides, and he was talking about his children. He was saying, it's a long bit, and I'm going to mess it up for sure, but I'll send it to you later. We can put it here. But essentially, he was doing an argument from Parmenides from 2,000 years ago, using it to express how young parents feel when they talk to their kids and they start asking philosophical questions and stuff. And that's great, and that really introduces some of the philosophy out there. But actually doing philosophy, it's something else, right? It's a different activity.
Yeah, and I would love to. Sorry, go ahead, Diego.
Yeah, so if I can just pick up on the topic, because I think Mateus mentioned a key argument, in a way, presenting a different perspective to your analysis. And I think Marx is key here. Like Marx said, philosophers until now have just tried to interpret the world. The point is to change it. But what people mostly get wrong about this Marxist phrase or quote is that Marx was a fundamentally materialist philosopher. He was an anti-idealist, he did the Hegel inversion where he twisted dialectically the dialectics the other way around. So what he said is that first, in order to change ideas, we have to change the world first. The only way to change the world of ideas is to change the material world. So in that sense, if you go back to your perspective, comedy shows did more for gay rights in the 70s than philosophers did. And we will have to go again into this analysis, this Marxist analysis. Was the material conditions of the world in the right way for a show like that to even exist? And the fact that a show like that exists is what actually triggers the potential for those ideas to detonate the type of change that they were intended to create. I think it's interesting always to juxtapose the necessity for material conditions to presuppose the pathway for these ideas to go to the public. And it's kind of like the egg or the chicken analysis, where you say, well, if the material conditions are right, then the ideas are actually going to trigger something. If the material conditions are not right, the ideas will be just screaming into the void. I don't know if it makes any sense.
No, that makes sense. And I think that you rightly pointed out that I am making a materialist argument. I'm saying that the material conditions of the world are going to dictate what's funny and what's not, and not the philosophical ideas that people have that they then try to put into the movie. And then again, it becomes, funny because it's true, not true because it's funny, not because it's true. But as far as what Mateus was saying about the role of philosophers, and I would also go farther to say the responsibility of philosophers, is something that I've been thinking about a lot. And I know you guys are, largely a presence that speaks for the left, but I've been having a lot of arguments recently about an outsider to philosophy. I'm curious if you guys are familiar with this guy. He's an outsider to philosophy who is doing philosophical work outside of academia. James Lindsay, do you guys know about him?
No, I don't know James Lindsay.
Okay. So he wrote this book called Cynical Theories, which is basically, he kind of creates his own genealogy of essentially like Foucault. It's very similar to what Jordan Peterson does, except he's actually putting in like the genealogical work of basically like Foucault and to some extent postmodernism, all the way up until like cancel culture. And so he kind of traces this genealogy, which is very controversial because, as many philosophers have rightly pointed out, you're either getting postmodernism wrong or you're getting Hegel wrong. And those are most of the criticisms that I've heard. But here's my problem about that idea. In most of the discourses that I've seen philosophers engage with this particular figure and figures like him, so maybe just think of Jordan Peterson, for example, oftentimes their counter argument is, well, he didn't get blank right, or he didn't get postmodernism right, he didn't get Baudrillard right, whatever. So my problem with that, and the problem I have with that, is that after that, the argument is shut down. He got it wrong, therefore the idea that he's putting forward is invalid. But that's a problem for me because, one, The idea that the masses, like everybody who has a stake in, the development of culture, which is basically everyone, they're ever going to have a detailed and nuanced understanding of Hegel, whatever that even means. Whatever that even means, Hegel is it's largely poetry. Let's be honest here, So that's not going to happen. So what I don't like about how certain people engage with Lindsay is that they say, "Oh, he tried to condense postmodernism into 3 distinct principles, which is wrong." And of course you can say that it's wrong because postmodernism, by its very definition, evades definition. I have this problem where philosophers will just point out the inaccuracy of attributing certain ideas to philosophers as if that in itself is enough to basically cede responsibility for the fact that these ideas, not unlike a certain virus, do mutate as they flow downwind. And I find that a lot of these thinkers like Jordan philosophers in the academy are not engaging with Jordan Peterson and James Lindsay on that notion that if we're playing a game of telephone, it doesn't matter what the first person said. If 50 people later, they're getting it completely wrong, that's still the idea that we have to deal with, if that makes sense. So in my opinion, and the whole point of this is that I think philosophers need to stop writing papers that only 15 people are going to read and start making YouTube channels and really talking to people on their level.
There is a need for this, for more people to get tough ideas. I agree with that. And I think we should have less ivory tower philosophers to define them in a way, right? The ivory tower philosopher would be the guy that stays in a department, a philosophical department, and he just writes papers which 15 people read. I think we need less of those, and we need more of the others, because after the death of God and the rise of nihilism, consumerism, hedonism, senselessness, why stuff happens. Humanity is and still is kind of shaky. People don't have no idea where to attribute meaning, So in that sense, we need more meaning in the hands of everyone. Okay. But we still need those ivory tower philosophers. Why? Just a few of them, not maybe, millions of them. We don't, because that only separates the gap from the best knowledge we have available in humanity and the knowledge everyone else has access to, but we still need those guys working on the theory, and it's not us by far. I'm talking about guys with PhDs and post PhDs, and they need to have those conversations. And the sad thing about this is that it takes years to get into the masses, 300, 400 years. But for example, to cite one of the recent works in philosophy that really give me hope is the work from Derek Parfit. Are you familiar with Derek Parfit? I'm
not.
So Derek Parfit is this guy. He's a legend but not in the mainstream, the internet, right? He's a legend in the philosophical departments. He's a guy that did, he calls it the triple theory. So he took 3 normative theories of ethics and he did a work that is something else. It's impressive. The book is called Reasons and Persons. And this book took him 40 years to write, and it really, and the book starts with a phrase from Nietzsche that says we have never seen such an open sea before us for the lovers of knowledge, right? And he's talking about objective ethics, ethics that are something that is not related. Well, I'm sorry, non-Catholic ethics. So it's an ethics that can be, and they put it in something called mathematical ethics. So, and hear me out. This is where it gets weird. What Nietzsche raised, well, he raised many things, but one of the things he raised, he understood that there was a false conscience of ethics in Europe, right? He said God is dead and we have killed him. There's this huge body of a giant dead in the continent and it's starting to stink. We have to get it out. And essentially he said that all of the ethics that we have at that time, right, the 19th century, and also from the Catholics and from the philosophers, it's fake. It's a false conscience, right? And he broke the mold, right? The ethics mold. And now he opened the way. If there wasn't a Nietzsche, there would never have been a Derek Parfit. And Parfit stood, and now he wrote this book in the 80s. It's from 1984, 85, something like that. But this book, it's a very tough thing to read. It's pure logic. It's nothing but logical ethics. And he's opening a new field where there might be a possibility for a future of ethics to look more like mathematics and less like I don't know, poetry or expression. Why is this controversial? Why is this controversial? Because when we speak about ethics, automatically our brains go into it's subjective, and he's opening a field, so those kinds of progress are really necessary in the world. And this guy, he had to be closed for 40, 60 years. And now it's not fair that they should teach those kinds of things, maybe from people very young, so they have a new kind of mind, to open up. But if we don't have those kinds of guys, we will never going to be able to get out of some problems. On the other side, I do agree that we need more knowledge on with simple words, not Hegel-like knowledge. We need much more pragmatic, well-spoken of knowledge that can be spread out,
So here I think there are two comments worthwhile. Like, first, I think we are all still in this uncertainty phase where we don't know how to deal with this fall of meta-narratives, which according to me is one of the main points regarding postmodernism. Like, once we lose the meta-narratives, like, what the hell do we hang on to? And this is the current like very uncomfortable situation that we're in. Like, we see a lot of people trying to cling to the past, like to reinterpret the past or revalidate the past in a way that is more relevant. Like, we're trying to prove that morality can be objective or mathematical or utilitarian. Like, I think all of these are ways in which we are coping with the fact that meta-narratives were always fake. Like, we were comfortable under the idea.
By meta-narratives? What do you mean by,
like, for example, Christian morality, the struggle of classes from Marx? All these are meta-narratives in the sense that there's a linear process of evolution for humanity. There's a path or a story that we can follow, and this story will eventually lead us to a better tomorrow. And postmodernism, to me, one of the main categories or main presence from postmodernism to the world is the fall of meta-narratives. Like, all leading meta-narratives were dismantled by postmodernism, like the moral of Christianity, even the class struggle from Marxism. Like, all these meta-narratives just fell down. And so all of a sudden, everybody's like, whoa, what the fuck? And at the moment, one of the last few remaining meta-narratives is this idea of progress by development of capitalism, or progress by development of technology, which is also crumbling in so many ways, because we see the internal contradictions, we see the dangers of this meta-narrative, we see this meta-narrative has no internal logic, is full of fail and cracks, which has been analyzed by postmodernist philosophers all around the world. And this notion of being left alone or being left in the void with nothing to grasp onto is this sense of, openness that I think Nietzsche described. Openness in the sense of what Parfit described. Like, we have this openness. Why? Because old meta-narratives are dead. So we are at this moment where we have to either deal with the fact that no meta-narrative is really relevant or let's say strong enough to survive the test of time, or just the fact that we are beings that need to grasp until some sort of meta-narratives. And even if in the absence of meta-narratives, we will end up creating new ones, which is the argument for so many new philosophers after postmodernism, like Zizek. Zizek has said, even if we live into a determined world, even if the universe is deterministic or not, it doesn't really matter. We are subjects. We are going to invent, and we're going to give meaning to whatever we are experiencing. So even if we tear down every leading or dominating meta-narrative, we will create new ones. I think it's just the fact that we have to come up with new meta-narratives that are less pervasive, like less harmful to ourselves as a species and to the way that we relate to nature and the way we relate to each other. It's not the fact that we don't need any meta-narratives or meta-narratives are fundamentally wrong. It's just the fact that we have to be flexible enough to update the meta-narratives and come up with new narratives that are going to guide the progress of life in a more ethical manner. And this is why I agree with Mateus 100% that even if philosophers are in a way disconnected to the everyday life, it doesn't devalidate or like in a way rest or subtracts from their value, because they are going to be the ones leading like the rigorous argumentation that is necessary to create original thought. But then again, if this original thought is not available to the everyday people, to the everyday worker, to the everyday artist, to the everyday person, then do they have any value or not? You know, but as always, we have these spear tip thinkers that are dedicating 40 years of their life to write a book that is going to change ethics and morals after the fall of meta-narratives, to come up with a new mathematical utilitarian moral. But then somebody has to do the work of actually implementing this new logic to systems, so they will wildly change our material conditions, and then the effects are going to be felt. Like this is my notion. I don't even think, like, because the interesting argument to make will be, will ever, like, you have to think about the fact that even comedians read, or even comedians get their inspiration from somewhere. I really doubt the notion that comedians have these spontaneous great ideas where they have, you know, Socratic reflections out of nowhere, because they, you know, even words are a tool created by experts. And this is why I love Deleuze. You know, Deleuze and Guattari, they came up with this notion that we have to develop tools of resistance. And language is a tool of resistance. Even when we create these powerful words like deconstruction, alienation, you know, like anti-Oedipus, organs without bodies, you know, like these concepts, these notions, they tend to permeate society in the level of a viral mimic behavior through language that will eventually create like this domino effect that will change everyone's mind. That's kind of how language works, you know? So in order to make the argument that comedians are making a better work at philosophy than philosophers, you will have to first determine, are they owners of their ideas, or where are they getting these reflections from?
Yeah. So